and dandy by me. I would never shame you for proper and appropriate cat care.
Fair enough.
All right. So we're here to ruthlessly debate and epically own one another in the free marketplace of ideas, correct?
God, I hope so.
Hey, so first off, I mean, I could, if you would prefer, would you like to introduce yourself to my young and gullible audience?
Well, they're clearly an audience that enjoys watching leftists make arguments and debate people, and that's something I professionally approve of, so that they're fine by me. Name is Ben Burgis. I wrote a book called Give Them an Argument, and now going to be starting on Saturday, actually, a podcast with the same name. Anybody wants to tune in to watch that, it's going to have Harvey K talk about radical history, Bhaskar Sankara talk about socialism. Should be a good episode. I also did for about a year and a half a segment on the Michael Brooks show called The Debunk. I don't know. I guess that's probably good, but I think what we're going to talk about today during the epic, brutal owning of one another is some things that you recently said about class reductionism and maybe how it would be useful for socialists to think about how class and economics relate maybe to other things, like race and different forms of bigotry and discrimination. They're based on different things, but I don't want to get too much ahead of ourselves.
Right. So first of all, thank you for coming on. And my apologies for your loss with respect to Michael Brooks.
Thank you.
Yes. Very unfortunate that. So with regards to class reductionism, so there's this tendency that I've noticed, and I understand the term class reductionism gets thrown around by a lot of people. A lot of them are liberals who get upset at the mere mention of class. It's obviously not the spirit I'm trying to evoke here, but I have noticed there are some people who I'd consider proper leftists, usually Marxists, who are very sometimes keen to reduce any given social dynamic exclusively to a class one, which is frustrating for me because this is something that I deal with when trying to debunk Ben Shapiro type arguments. The approach initially is nearly identical. The Marxist, who I accuse of being a class reductionist, and the Ben Shapiro type will both say, oh, well, you have this problem and that problem with the black community in America. But then if you look at it, it turns out that actually, well, this is a product of poverty or this or that, the other. And so really, this isn't a race thing. This is a classism thing. And then the divergence there is that Ben Shapiro doesn't give a fuck about poor people and will just go, it's a classism thing, and then stop implicitly saying it's justified by the meritocratic failures of whoever he's talking about. Whereas then, of course, the Marxist would go on and talk about class issues. So credit where credit's due, they're obviously better there. But there's more to it than the class, of course. There are very much race or gender or sexuality exclusive issues, or if not exclusive, then at the very least irreducible, that sometimes get looked over, and it worries me. So that's my opening pitch.
Sure. All right. So two thoughts about that. First of all, if somebody denies when it comes to something like police violence, you can probably hear that.
He agrees. You can if you want. By the way, we're not offended.
Yeah, I am actually gonna open the door.
Yes, I have a cat. I have a cat as well. We're all familiar with the rigmarole. Guys, tomorrow we're getting the new cat, the hairless one.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, gotta go out.
Yeah. So look, if anybody denies that that racial bias exists, that just to focus on that example, we can also talk about the other examples you brought up, kind of gestured at just now, or that racial bias plays a role in things like police violence, then that's certainly somebody I have a disagreement with. And if I don't think that that's a very common position. I certainly don't think that any of the people that you mentioned in the initial segment that a few weeks ago, which I know is ancient history and Twitter time, but
Right.
that
I think I said Angie Speaks, Peter Coffin. I don't remember if I said Jimmy Dore. I think I said Kyle Kalinske has tendencies to this effect. Fuck. Chat probably remembers better than I do, but yeah, I vaguely recall.
Chapo, yeah, I think you did mention Jimmy Dore, who's actually the only example that I can't really fight with you about because I've never really watched Jimmy Dore. The only clips I've ever seen of Jimmy Dore were ones that were on the Michael Brooks show where he'd like say stupid shit about Brazil. So I never really felt any impulse to check out his work. But beyond the Coffins and Angie Speaks, Kyle Kalinske, you also I know mentioned the Chapo hosts and also Glenn Greenwald. So
Glenn Greenwald, I think that may have. I think if I were to rephrase that, I think it would be more that I feel Glenn Greenwald is very permissive of class reductionism, or perhaps that he is ideologically inclined to work with people of that lens, less so him himself. But I think that still stands as a very similar criticism. I'm just clarifying with that one.
Gotcha. So in any case, I don't. So in that example, right? I don't think that any of those people on that list, or certainly people who were often accused of class reductionism, like for example Adolf Reed, I don't think any of them deny that racial bias exists. Racial bias plays a role in problems like police violence. I'm sure you can find people, on Reddit and other places who do, because in my experience, there is no subspecies of stupid shit that you can't find somebody on, Reddit or Twitter who believes. But I think that where maybe there are certainly differences in emphasis, maybe differences in approach, just sticking with that example, are going to be on things like, okay, so is it useful to frame police violence as in primarily racial terms? Is that either descriptively accurate or useful politically, in terms of forging the broadest possible alliance to do something about it? And there, I think it maybe does matter whether you think that racial bias again certainly plays a role, right? Like there's a really good debate between Radley Balko, who's a right-wing libertarian whose economic views I hate, but who's very good on some of these issues, and some ghoul from the Manhattan Institute about this at the Soho Forum, where Balko cites, for example, a study showing that not only are there racial disparities in traffic stops, but that they increase. That the racial disparity narrows
After sunset.
as after sunset, exactly, right? So I find that pretty compelling. On the other hand, I think that my strong suspicion is that if we could magically erase racial bias tomorrow, then there would still be a considerable racial disparity in police violence, and the primary reason for that is that this kind of aggressive, militaristic style of policing is primarily a problem. My loathing of Ben Shapiro is second to none, but sometimes opportunistically, I'm sure he does say true things. Is primarily a problem in poor neighborhoods, and because of the racial history of the United States, slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, etc., poverty is wildly unequally racially distributed. And that might seem like 6 of one, half dozen of the other, because okay, so are we just talking about race or some phrase like structural racism, or are we talking about the economic ripple effects of past systems of racialized oppression? But the reason that I think that distinction actually does matter is because it tells us something about how we might try to do something about it, right? So So I certainly don't think the element of racial bias should be ignored. But I also think that it's a mistake to send poor white people, poor people of other races, the message that this isn't your problem, right? This is someone else's problem, and maybe you're being asked to be an ally in the sense of of kind of altruistically caring about this on other people's behalf, but you don't really have to worry about it. When instead, should say, all right, well, this there's certainly a disproportion, but this is a much more general problem, and everybody should care about trying to do not if you're rich, because if you're rich, the police are protecting you and deferring to you, right? But everybody else should care about this, and everybody else has a stake in trying to do something about it.
Right. I don't disagree with I think most of that, save for the parts where you said you disagree with what I said specifically, which obviously I disagree with that. With regards to sort of prescriptively how we should
Yeah.
deal with this movement, I agree, of course. The vast, vast, vast majority of the disparity that black people experience in this country, certainly with regards to police, is in large part a product of past racial biases compounding to existing material imbalance, which then is technically a part of systemic racism, of course, but it's also material in the sense that it could be addressed by fixing any class disparity. It's racial disparity enforcing a class disparity, and to an extent, vice versa as well. Now, sort of, and in Ouroboros, when you have more black people who are poor, then even if you have race-neutral laws, they end up affecting black people more because of previous circumstance. I think that, and I don't disagree with any of that. I think that there's a difficult discussion to be had on the extent to which you should impose a class analysis on a movement that is mostly caught up in liberalism. By default, any movement the Democrats support in this country is going to be largely liberal backed, just by way of our numbers. I can't imagine what proper leftists can't be more than a few percentage points of the population of this country. I wouldn't really know, but it's certainly not as many as there are people who sort of vacantly support the idea of racial equality.
Yeah, I mean, right now we've got, there are four, putting together both houses of Congress, there are four people out of 535 who call themselves socialists in any sense, which is, I mean, at least a good realistic place to start thinking about.
We'll raise the numbers soon. We'll work on the ratio. Yeah. My issue is, so I guess I can branch this, I think, into three specific issues that I've seen. The first one, this is something Crystal Ball does a lot, is when they talk about Black Lives Matter as a liberal or like an identitarian movement, which really irks me for a lot of reasons. Much in the same way that any discussion of police without a class angle in this country is woefully inadequate. I think that we have to recognize the only way to meaningfully affect that social interest in the class dynamic there is to work with and then kind of guide or coax movements in a given direction. But sometimes I see this outright dismissal, and it varies to extent. Are you familiar at all with the subreddit Stupid Poll?
I know vaguely what it is. I generally try to stay far away from Reddit.
Right, they're good, but they're irrelevant, and you should strike them from your mind. Whatever the case is, there is this contingent of like angry, very edgy leftists online. Leftists maybe being a dubious classification there, who are obsessed with rejecting anything they consider liberal. Among those things being, sort of sensitivity, civility politics, which good, fuck it, intersectionality, and Black Lives Matter. And I feel like sometimes we placate or we sort of gesture to these groups in our language at times. It reminds me of the class, well, I don't know if you're voting for Biden or not, but it reminds me a lot of the people who argue this sort of this pseudo-historical materialist defense for not voting for Biden, where it feels like we're scrounging up any manner of like permissive explanations, anything that sounds good, anything that sounds leftist, as long as we're owning the libs, as long as we're striking back against the DNC. And that's what bugs me the most, I think. If we want to introduce a class element to the Black Lives Matter protests, Godspeed us. We have our work cut out for us. There are liberals everywhere. And I think to an extent, there is good work being done on that front. But that work isn't being done by commentators or podcasters or politicians or talk show hosts who are blithely dismissing Black Lives Matter as liberal.
I mean, you could have stopped that sentence several words earlier, right?
True. I could have, but even more so, those people.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple thoughts about this. First of all, because I think that is actually important from what I can remember of your original video. Remember, this is something you talked about there, and I don't want this to get lost. So just to put this out there, first of all, yes, I am voting for Biden. I'm actually because of my work plans, there are 2 possible states that I might be living in this fall, and both of them could conceivably, both of them could conceivably go either way. Both of them went to Trump last time. But I do have the position that we should do like French communists did during the Chirac-Le Pen runoff election, when there were people doing things like going to the polls with clothespins on their noses, and or at least threatening to, and putting up posters in the streets of Paris saying vote for the crook, not the fascist. Which is the level of honesty that I like for that decision. I sometimes say I'm going to go home and throw up after I do it, but I'm going to do it, right?
Yeah, to be a leftist is to suffer. We're just fulfilling our, sort of God-given emotional state.
Sure. And I will say, right, and I don't want the part about Crystal Ball and Black Lives Matter and all that to get lost either, because I do want to go back to that, but just real briefly on the election issue. I don't necessarily see much of a connection between that and the class reductionism position, though, right? Since I think that on almost regardless of emphasis, right? The case for and against is very similar, right? So the case against voting for Biden in swing states is, well, in most cases, just Biden is awful and reactionary and an enemy of the people, all of which is true, but I think the premise doesn't support the conclusion in the way that people think it does. And the case for it is that, look, we can make strategic decisions about what kind of enemy that we want to fight on about which issues, for the next 4 years and on what terrain. And I think that since we are, especially because we're starting from a place of relative weakness, as we were discussing earlier, I think that it would be really good. Hey, we could just do this purely in flatly economic, reductionist terms. We could, are we going to be better off fighting on a terrain where the National Labor Relations Board is stacked with people who are crusading to wipe out what's left of public sector unions, or not, right? And that's a pretty easy tactical calculation to me.
Thank you. Thank God, honestly. The just our ability to meaningfully organize under a Biden presidency, under an inept, weak, dawdling, neoliberal, is so much greater than what we could conceivably do under a fascist and an administration full of people who are willing to enable that fascism and wait on the courts to respond.
Yeah, totally. And also, and that feels less hyperbolic than ever after the tweets about delaying the election and sending the DHS to Portland to stick people in unmarked vans. If that makes me a liberal, I'm willing to be a liberal. But and there are people on your list, right? Not all of them, but some of them, who do disagree with me about that subject. Like I said, I'm not really sold on the ways that they necessarily relate to each other. But just so this doesn't get lost, on Crystal Ball and on Black Lives Matter and all of that, right? I can't speak to what anybody might say on Reddit, right? But I have watched a decent amount of the Rising, and I'll listen to Joe Rogan while I go on runs. It doesn't take a lot of thought. And so, for example, I listened to the episode of Joe Rogan's show from, I don't know, earlier this summer, late spring, where Crystal and her conservative co-host Sagar were guests, and most of it was spent fighting about the protests and the repression of the protests by the Trump administration and by the police, and and Rogan is a mishmash of left wing and right wing impulses that haven't really cohered into a coherent
Politically
worldview.
Incomprehensible, just a complete chimera of every imaginable position.
I mean, honestly, I think that in some ways, he's where like a lot of Americans are, that they have political instincts that go off in different directions, but they don't think about it all the time like weird people like us do. So you get that kind of chimera effect. But in any case, right? So sometimes, right, Rogan will assail the Trump administration's immigration policy, or he'll defend Medicare for all when he's interviewing Dan Crenshaw. Other times, like this one, he sided with Sagar about the repression of the protests, or the way Joe and Sagar would put it would be repressing the riots. I suspect we agree about all that. But
I would hope so.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. I would hope so. It's very black and white to me.
Yeah. But that episode, right? I listened to 2 hours of Crystal Ball defending defending the protests, saying, talking about all of the police repression that's already existed, talking about how Trump's call to call in the troops, would make things 1,000 times worse. And I have to say, like doing a very good job in a very hostile 2-in-1 sort of environment that, like, I kind of I was about to put this in a way that might implicate people I'm related to. I want to be real careful about that. But
no, you can't. No. It's a tradition on this stream to implicate as many people as possible.
Let's say one could understand how somebody could listen to that and think, man, I really want this person to come to my next post-COVID Thanksgiving dinner to argue, with my relatives who support Trump, because I think she was doing a very good job of making that case, that this isn't just, that this isn't just a bunch of criminals, that this is based on a real complaint, that the repression of it has been outrageous and horrible, and without grandstanding, but in a way that's like actually might make people who disagree with that think twice.
If I may here, I think,
go for it.
I mean, I'm much more sour on Crystal Ball than you are. I have a very vivid memory from that Joe Rogan bit where Sagar just goes off on this talking point where the reason that these movements, the BLM riots, whatever, are impotent and unnecessary, and additionally the reason why the corporations are supporting them with the little black squares and with their sort of tacit support and their little public messages is because they were brainwashed by Frankfurt School academics who are Marxists, who instilled weakness in the minds. Or he went off on what is essentially the Jewish question. I mean, he didn't mention any Jewish people, but he did talk about Goldman Sachs quite a bit. It felt like signaling to me, at least. And afterwards, Crystal Ball just sort of nodded, I understand, of course, when you're in the company of somebody like Sagar, it is not possible to respond to every dumb thing they say, because you are inundated with talking points that you have to respond to. But that one, it really rung negatively with me. I don't want to get too hung up on the Crystal Ball Sagar relationship specifically.
I would just say, look, something that a dubious privilege that we have in common is that we've both had debates with Stefan Molyneux, and so I think that, like, in an environment like that, certainly, look, this is something I struggle with all the time, because I'm never sure after the fact what the right line is between every time some assumption that's crazy and wrong is introduced, pointing it out, versus trying to stick to what you think the main thing is that you're talking about, and trying to to make a case in a way that might mean something. Well, not to Molyneux if that's who you're talking to, but
Right.
to people in the audience, who might go either way on that, right? Versus the stuff where the next day you're like, yeah, I really should have said something,
No,
something about that.
you're right. That is
Yeah.
that's a charitable, not an unreasonably charitable, I think, take on that. When you're talking with, I don't know, Sagar seems relatively far gone to me, personally, in terms of the from the scale of like Ben Shapiro, horrible as he is. If you talk, I think he responds to the things you say. There's sort of a direct relationship there. Whereas with some people like Stefan Molyneux, it's moon logic from start to finish, and it's just about holding on for the ride and trying to get in your bits when you can. My general opinion of Crystal Ball is rather negative. I don't want to get too hung up on those specifically, though I acknowledge that one specific instance could be attributed to just a reasonable sort of passe.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, without going down a whole Crystal Saga rabbit hole,
right.
I will say that that when I do watch it, and it's something I'll watch every now and then because I'm going to be eating for the next 20 minutes, and I want to watch something on YouTube, and I have seen quite a bit of the two of them arguing about these exact subjects. This seems to be this seems to be a pretty common place for there to be back and forth, and I think this is probably one of the places where it's the it's the most contentious, right? I mean, if I have a criticism of Crystal Ball, it's that the Times, whereas she will say things like Trump is a fake populist, but I also think that there are times when she should push back against the premise that like, I don't know, Tucker Carlson says something,
Right.
and
well, that's my
and
main issue, I think.
Sagar praises it, and sometimes her approach is more like, okay, we agree about A, but then we disagree about B or C, and get into the xenophobia or whatever, and I really want to go, of course, right about the xenophobia, but I really want to go back to A, right, and say, well, hold on, right, like Tucker Carlson says that he gives a shit about A, but he clearly doesn't, right? I mean, like, he's the biggest hack in the world. He used to be, for years, he was the kind of conservative that the guys on Chapo call a bow tie dipshit. Is just a totally straight down the line normal Republican, and then he kind of rebranded himself as this dime store Father Coughlin, when the winds shifted. But like, if you actually like try to peel even a little bit behind the surface of the populist rhetoric, he doesn't support Medicare for all. He doesn't even support
he's a complete billionaire stooge. My greatest criticism here, and this is the line that I use: you can work together on solutions, not on problems. If there's a conservative who wants to say, for example, fuck me, I don't know, pull out of a military base or raise funding for X program, and fine, great, I'll work with them on that, unequivocally, as we'll negotiate terms. But very often complaining about a problem together leads to two very different solutions. This is the premise, I think, of the Rising, this shared left-right populism. It's anti-corporate, but the difference is one is sincere anti-corporatism and one very much is not. When leftists are anti-corporate, at least to the best of my knowledge, this is fairly sincere anti-corporatism. But when you have these Sagar-Tucker types, it's about it's essentially, the complaint is that these corporations are not best serving the will of the American people, that they are disloyal, they will export jobs, they will cheat on their taxes or what have you, they'll take advantage of loopholes and lobby, but they don't have an issue with the idea of multi-billionaires having a massive amount of control in our society. They just want them to be patriots. And that's the main, I fundamentally reject this idea that based on anti-corporatism alone, I have anything to get along with regards to right-leaning people. I argue with Nazis pretty often. They're very anti-corporate because they think the corporations are all run by Jews. But if I stop that conversation on them saying, I have an issue with the extent to which American corporations fuck over the working class, and I just agreed with them on that, I would be leaving out the entire underlying set of problems with their motivation.
Yeah, and I think not that like without making any claims about the where exactly the some of these figures fall on the spectrum of right wing fuckery. I would still, I think that I think that there's a obviously if you stopped at that and didn't dispute the anti-Semitism, that's one problem. But also if you stopped at that and didn't say and didn't point out enough, right? Some of these criticisms are a matter of degree. You say you have a problem with that, right? But like, what concretely do you even want to do about it, right? So I'll just say, quick shameless plug. I have an article that just came out yesterday called "Will the Real Right Wing Populists Please Stand Up?" which is entirely about how figures like Carlson and Bannon are completely full of shit, or very nearly completely full of shit about these issues. Even apart from the xenophobia. So Bannon, for example, might want to raise the top marginal tax. Like his like unsuccessful thing he wanted Trump to do was like raise the top marginal tax rate to like maybe closer to what it was during the Clinton years in the 90s, and like spend some of that on infrastructure. But I mean, like the idea that like that's what would pass for economic populist policy is just absurd.
But
right?
this is what I'm so worried about. If I may, this is what I'm so concerned about. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that is the most likely future for the Republican Party. You have your Tucker Carlson figures. Class antagonisms are only going to rise with time. I don't think we're getting another placating era like the 1990s. I think things are going to continue to boil. And for the Republican Party to stay relevant, they have to not capitulate, but they at least have to gesture, aesthetically, rhetorically, at this rising tendency. And what I worry is going to happen is we're going to have Republican candidates and demagogues making these arguments that we need to work on the class divide, we need to address the class disparity, but we're going to need national unity to do it. We're going to need to work together as a people. We're going to need to avoid divisiveness. And this mirrors, in my mind, very real arguments I've heard from leftists where they say that focusing on race or talking about race at all when trying to address the systemic problems in our country is divisive because it ostracizes essentially racist white working class voters, which may well be true, but you could say the same thing in the opposite direction, where any meaningful challenge to capitalism ostracizes the people who might otherwise just be interested in race equity. It's a very scary precedent. I wonder how the extent to which we're going to move in this sort of Nazbol vortex with time, where we can all get behind the idea that class-wise this country is fucked, but all the niggling gender, sex, race issues are going to be suppressed in favor of a unified approach on that and that alone.
Yeah, so a couple things on this. First of all, I think that the good news on the larger subject is that I think that Thomas Piketty, I'm never sure how to say that name, but his new book Capital and Ideology, apparently he's got this argument in there that like maybe the only countries where there's really room for right-wing populists to actually do anything really in terms of economic redistribution are maybe some of the former Soviet countries, a couple of developing nations, because these are the places where the capitalist class is weak enough that they could have, even on the right, people who are throwing them under the bus to a certain extent, right? They're certainly not going to expropriate them or anything, and actually get away with that. I think in the United States, because the Republican Party is so completely beholden to those very powerful interests, then it really, I think, limits their extent, the extent to which the Carlsons and the Josh Hawleys and Steve Bannons can do can do anything but talk. Now, if there were people, if I thought that there were a lot of people on the left who were sane, and I've got to say on the Nosbol thing, even I think that anybody who actually has a position that they're going to try to combine being a Nazi with any sort of Bolshevism or Marxism or whatever. I think, thank God, right? Is an extremely rare position. In fact, I think that even anybody who would say something like we should vote to reelect Trump. There are people who have a kind of far left. We shouldn't vote for any of these bastards position. In fact, I think there are people who are on various sides of the debates about how to think about the relationship between class and race and these other things who have that position. But like anybody who's willing to actually go as far as to say we should vote for Trump, or give money to Josh Hawley's reelection campaign, or we should give if Tucker Carlson ran for president in 2024, which is actually not impossible, then we should support that. I think that would be a vanishingly rare position on the left. And if there were people who held that, right, I mean, I'd certainly be horrified by it, right? I mean, I don't even like giving them a little bit of rhetorical credit, much less much less any of that. But right now, the specter of like Strasserism, right, of people being of people actually supporting fascism, or even supporting right-wing populism that we might argue about how close it is to fascism. Right now, that's not something I at least see a lot of.
Well, I think it depends on the extent or the threshold where you cut it off. There were a lot of not just left-leaning people, but moderately left people who, at least a few years back, maybe not a few years back, sometime over the past 24 months, have been sort of plotting, we have to hand it to him, to Tucker Carlson, for standing up to corporations. And I wonder, and because, first of all, when it comes to which candidates we support, their actual, honest, integral interest in addressing class divide is utterly meaningless. Aesthetics and rhetoric are the only thing that count for anything, including with leftists. And I know that because I'm still arguing with people who think Xi Jinping is leading a proletariat state into the 21st century. So I know there are a lot of people who are like this. And I've seen leftists, proper, good, not even class reductionist leftists, mind you, just in people who I'd consider a little bit gullible, who think like, oh, maybe Tucker Carlson's the start of people are waking up on the Republican Party. I don't think it's that unlikely that a Tucker Carlson figure could achieve a lot of, if not at least left-leaning support, then left-leaning trepidatious refusal to condemn, because they'll phrase it as you'll have this neoliberal establishment Democratic candidate, but then you'll have somebody new and bold and exciting on the right who will shake things up by really holding Wall Street to it, even though that's exactly what Trump said he would do. It's not the first time that fascists have used left-leaning rhetoric to trick people with sympathies to the left. That was, after all, what Hitler did. I don't know if we're there now. I certainly think there's a decent chance we might be there in the future. And I think the only way of preventing this, of really genuinely keeping that from happening, is an unrelenting intersectional approach to all forms of political organization. That's what I would like to see. So when lefties say stuff like, well, if we just addressed the class divide, there would be no more racism, I want that ostracized. I want that gone. First of all, because it's not true. There have absolutely been ethnic conflicts and ethnic oppression in countries that have abolished the commodity form, undeniably. And second of all, because it sort of obfuscates and overwrites a lot of the very legitimate concerns of people here in this country today who, if they were not being sort of ignored by this weird anti-intersectionalist approach, might otherwise be inclined to join with us. I trust the intersectional approach the most because it has the capacity to be unrelentingly class-oriented when it needs to be, but then also to acknowledge the, this or that. The Jews being an excellent example, being at least comparably a financially privileged demographic in this country, though they obviously experience, a tremendous amount of harm in other respects. I don't think any leftist, well, I've argued with people who have said this, but I don't think most leftists would say that Jews aren't oppressed by way of their wealth or their relationship to the means of production on average. They recognize there's something else at work there. I'm only asking people have that same potential for caveat in their head when they talk about these issues. Yes, class is a massively important issue, but I don't know if that's worth trading discussions on race relations. Yes, class is a massive issue, but I don't know if that means I can work with right-leaning populists on this, that, or the other. That's all I really am looking for. And when people engage in language that makes it seem like they're so angry with the Democratic Party that they, if only anybody would address the class divide, that makes me very, very worried. Does that make sense?
I think I know what you're saying. I don't want to get off on a big tangent about this, but which of these countries that have abolished the commodity form?
Well, when I say I'm perhaps using this a little bit lightly here, when I was talking mostly about the Soviet Union, of course they didn't properly. I recognize. But even if the Soviet Union had completely rid themselves of a class divide, the ethnic conflicts in there were rooted in national prejudice. It wasn't just a matter of they have less money, therefore the NKVD are meaner to them or something,
Yeah. So I guess first of all, I do think that even though all of these prejudices, anti-Semitism certainly, right? When my great grandparents were getting out of the Ukraine in a hurry, right? I think some of the dynamics of that did have a lot to do with economic scapegoating. I think you even kind of referred to that earlier. That's why, right? August Bebel, right, called anti-Semitism the socialism of fools, because people are falling for this trick, where they're being where instead of blaming an economic structure for their misery, they're being told to blame this maybe certain ethnic subcategory of capitalists and therefore a certain ethnic subcategory of the population, whether they're capitalists or not. But I'm sure that even if we, did abolish the commodity form, which they certainly didn't in the Soviet Union. And look, cards.
Of course, I'm no tanky. Yes, I was a little hasty on that.
Cards on the table. I don't. I think probably we can't do that anytime soon anyway, right? I think that a sort of short-term achievable form of socialism, there would still be commodities. People are probably
like a market socialism kind of, where you preserve the.
Yeah.
Oh well, hey, we're both rad libs then. Nice. I'm very happy to hear that. I agree with you. Very much so,
I think long term.
One quick question: is there a thing making a clicking noise on your end?
Oh, yeah. I think here. Let's see if that solves it. Yeah. I think long term. Who knows, right? Maybe someday, we can have the fully automated luxury communism of our collective dreams. But I think in the short term, I think if we had. I think that probably having a if you're thinking about a 5 minutes after capitalism kind of society, I think that is still going to involve some sort of market sector where you're going to have competition between co-ops, but you've at least eliminated the domination of workers by capitalists. But in any case,
I completely agree. I don't think. I think that the movement towards like a full abolition of the commodity form is an incredibly delicate process that probably wouldn't best be handled by a single island, like single socialist country in the middle of a global warming crisis pandemic. Right. It just seems like an inopportune time to restructure our economy to that extent, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, and I think there are also I think there are also technical problems. I think that if you didn't have that kind of shortcut of having commodities, of having money as a way of signaling consumer preferences and things like that, then what you'd have to do is something like what like Michael Albert, Robin Hanhill talk about Paracon, which is, sounds almost a little petty, but it sounds to me like if you had to do everything the long way, that you have to have maybe like worker and consumer councils having some sort of incredibly complex negotiations about who's working how much and what kind of consumer needs are satisfied on the other end. Then maybe someday in the future, as AI progresses, a lot of that can be automated away and it sounds more reasonable. But right now, at least, maybe I'm just imposing too much of my personal preferences on the world here, but like I fucking hate going to meetings. It's my least favorite thing in the world. And so if you tell me that your vision of socialism is that we all spend half of our lives in meetings, then that doesn't sound very appealing to me.
The natural middle ground there is that we do spend half our time in meetings, but the socialist government CRISPR genetically reorganizes us, so we all are very boring and we like it. And that is the ideal, governing state of humanity.
I can't wait. I will. By the way, also, you mentioned Xi Jinping earlier. I have been to China. I remember the first day I was there. I went to was teaching a summer class at Jilin University in northern China, and the first day I was there, I went to find a place to take some Chinese money out of an ATM, and so I remember standing there, just taking out. There's this stack of bills that all have Chairman Mao's face on them, and in the background there was this giant Walmart. And I remember thinking the cognitive dissonance could not be greater here. But in any case,
I hope to go one day. I hope I'm not like registered as an enemy of the state or something, because I would love to go someday, just as a matter of perspective.
Sorry, go for it.
Oh, if I may, because we're running up in the hour time, and after that I have to run, unfortunately. But there were a couple. God damn it! Okay, there we go. Sorry, I dropped something very important to me.
Okay.
There were a couple of quick things I wanted to ask, I suppose, for clarification.
Yeah.
And then after that, I'd like you to have the final time, I suppose, before we run out. So,
yeah.
And I want to acknowledge this preemptively. I don't think that class reductionism is, at this point in time, like a huge problem on the left. Sometimes I think lefties get a little bit too fuck the DNC, fuck liberalism, and they tend to sort of offhandedly reject everything they associate with it. But a lot of it's playful, and I respect that, and I understand, like the same way I would respect the difference between the sort of joking anti-white comments that some lefties make, as opposed to the very real threats of genocide that people on the right will make about non-white people. But I am just concerned some people think that intersectionality is at odds with the material interests of left movements. And I hope you would agree with me then in saying, whatever extent we believe class reductionism is an issue, that intersectionality is enormously important, and that there are biases in our culture that cannot be addressed if everyone's relative wealth in relation to the means of production were leveled out. That there would still be stuff like, unless otherwise addressed, homophobia, transphobia, racial biases could still exist. Would you agree with that?
I'm sure all of those things would continue to exist. I actually think, maybe you think this is delusional and utopian, but I actually think racism certainly is the one that's most directly tied to economics. Not that there aren't economic dimensions of these other ones. I think would exist to a vastly decreased extent, because I think that part of what drives it. Look, part of why anti-Semitism, while by no means it's disappeared, right? Obviously. I was arguing with Michael Tracy on his stream last night, and there were chat comments that certainly would have dispelled any illusions that I might have on that. Right?
Wait. What was the argument about? I'm having him on soon as well.
It was kind of about the George Floyd protests and whether it's
okay.
So I think you have some sense of some of his positions on there, and you can probably
I can infer to the most reasonable degree. Yeah.
So you probably have at least a blurry watercolor impression of some of that, what was about, right? There was some discussion about whether it's inconsistent to care about stopping the spread of the virus, and also and also to go out and protest. That was one thing we argued about. There was some there was some discussion, just about a bunch of issues related to that. But in any case,
But did you have fun?
Yes, I did. I enjoyed the discussion, okay. But there are certainly people hanging out in that chat who would dispel who would dispel any illusions that I have that anti-Semitism have disappeared from the face of the earth. That's not even particularly a slam against Tracy. I think that's a slam against like YouTube comments often, not always, being a cesspool of vileness. But in any case, it hasn't disappeared, but it's much less virulent, certainly in the United States, than it was when, for example, my Jewish grandmother was a young woman, and I do think that part of that is that anti-Semitism at one point was tied to this kind of stigmatization of poor immigrants, often, from Eastern Europe and other places. And I think oftentimes it tends to be the case in a variety of societies and a variety of contexts that if there's an impoverished underclass, people find stories to tell themselves about why that underclass is impoverished, not because of some like contingent historical circumstances, but because they're like lazy and dirty and they have bad culture and whatever, right? Like I don't think that that's the only reason that any sort of ethnic prejudice has ever existed. I don't say that ethnic prejudice would cease to exist if we had workers' control of the means of production. But in fact, I actually think, going back to the market socialism discussion just for a second, I think that in some ways it would be really important to have like aggressive anti-discrimination rules in a private sector that was dominated by co-ops, because I think there's a certain danger there that you would get that you get some of the same patterns you see in trade, in like building trades unions, etc. But look, if the political takeaway of intersectionality, intersectionality is kind of an academic way of thinking about how various things can intersect, and certainly some of the academic work there I would have my critiques of. If the political takeaway is we should care about whether about questions of legal and civic equality, we should care about whether anti-discrimination ordinances, for example, are expanded to protect gay and trans people. We should care about racial bias playing a role in law enforcement institutions. Then yes, I think we should care about those things. I also think, I don't want this to get lost, that Peter and Ashley Coffin and Angie Speaks. I've been on that show 3 times, and I don't think I've ever been on where I haven't heard her use the phrase the Black freedom struggle at least a few times. I'll
try not to reopen any new wounds with my response.
Glenn Greenwald, who I do have some disagreements with about some of the right-wing populism stuff we were talking about earlier, but he's Glenn Greenwald has certainly talked plenty of time about the importance of gay rights. For example, his main work has been on issues about national security, drones, civil liberties, that primarily, that the greatest impact of which has been on Muslim immigrant populations, and is probably as not directly and obviously economic as anything like this is going to be. I'll also say that on the subject, I want to make a separation between the subject of like how we should think about elections and how we should think about the relationship between race and class. One really obvious way, just to ground this something concrete, that you can make that distinction is that there are people like me who think that who have criticisms of making the primary slogan of the movement against police violence one that frames things in exclusively racial terms rather than doing, for example, like what the civil rights movement did, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, to try to tie it more ostentatiously to an agenda that serves the interests of poor people of all races, while at the same time supporting those legal and civic rights for all. There are people like me, right, who are willing to close our eyes and think about the NLRB appointees and vote for Biden, and there are people who consider themselves to be Black nationalists who would never vote for Biden because Biden is a representative of the white supremacist power structure.
Oh, don't worry, we'll get them too. We're all going to be riding with Biden for this November. We'll get them all. I'm a very active advocate for the success of the Biden campaign.
Man, that's a sentence I'll bet you wish you had back in February you thought you would not have to say.
Ever since, look, when I was leading up to Super Tuesday, I put a cyanide capsule back behind my molars, and I haven't had to bite down it yet. Okay, so I'm at any point in time I'm ready, but for right now I'm still below the pain threshold. Unfortunately we're cutting near the end of stream time. I think that at least on almost any practical issue, I think we would agree. Maybe it's a matter of standards, not necessarily standards we hold to other people, the relative levels of importance we see in different sorts of language. Like, for an example, okay, I'm a little, people call me edgy. I swear to God, I'm not even that edgy these days, but people ascribe this label to me. And sometimes they'll make these big compilation posts and, oh, Vaush said bitch here, he said cunt here, so on and so forth, And, they'll make these big posts, and it's undeniable. I did do those things. But usually my fans kind of look at it and laugh because my whole platform is dedicated to sort of anti-sexism, anti-racism, that sort of thing anyway. So it's more of an aesthetic adoption rather than an actual attack on women. And different people buy that argument to different extents. And I wonder how much that's the case here, where with the people who I've called class reductionist leaning or class reductionist, how much the behavior and the mannerisms I've noticed are indicative of a rhetorical flourish that just upsets me more than it might others, or whether it's indicative of something more serious underlying. I guess, and again, all of this did spawn from a very offhanded comment during a phone stream where I was sitting on a carpet, crisscross applesauce. I would be certainly willing to look more into the language used by some of the people I detracted, though I reserve my criticisms at least for now. But I would agree with you, I think, ultimately, that this is not a tremendous issue until the Nazbol vortex arrives. And when it does, I'm going really fucking hard on this, okay? If I turn out to be right in 2028, we have some proto-Strasserite running under the Republican Party who plans to unite the country behind a proletarian uprising, okay? And lefties start voting for him, I'm coming right back at this, okay? If you and I aren't dead by then.
Well, look, if I am maybe less worried about that happening, if that does happen, I will certainly concede the point, which I'm sure will be a great comfort to you in the detention camp that we'll both be sitting in.
When they put our corpses next to each other in the mass grave, I'll have a real smug look on my face.
You'll look down and be like, "Oh, that guy was totally fucking wrong." But I guess the one thing I'd say is that I think that this is something that that whatever analytic disagreements we might have, obviously, and talking about how to think about the relationship between the history of racial bias and racial imbalances and class analysis of the United States probably takes more than parts of an hour. But whatever disagreements we might have about that, I think that what bugged me, about the original statement is not just that that I like some of these people very much, which I do, and I'm sure that's part of it, right? But also that I think that if the implication of calling somebody a class reductionist is that they are uninterested in, or maybe even hostile to, efforts to support, to push back against racial and other sorts of biases, to extend the protection of civic and legal equality to trans people who are being harassed, by legislators, in North Carolina, who want to regulate what bathroom they can go to. Then that's pretty serious, right? Like, because I've been called a liberal about 100 times by people who don't like one take or another that I've had about some of the very issues we talked about today.
Being called a liberal is basically like being called an N-word in leftist circles. I think that's about as bad as it gets. Radlib, actually, is it with a hard R, and liberal, I think, is the soft A.
Okay. I will say I don't experience it that way. Like somebody calls me a liberal, I kind of roll my eyes, because like that's like the way of like, basically it just feels like, they're saying that they think I have a bad take, and they want to express it in a way that really emphasizes what a revolutionary they are. And and that's just kind of, a lot of that strikes me as posturing and whatever, right? Like I don't that just means that like I'm not hardcore enough for them in some respect, right? So that doesn't bother me that much. But like if somebody suggests that I'm or whoever, right, is uninterested in or is hostile to things like things like combating racial bias in the criminal justice system, things like protecting gay and trans people against discrimination, then that strikes me as a fairly serious accusation, right? Like that'll get my back up. I'm very bothered about that accusation.
Yeah, I would. Well, I don't consider it synonymous to calling a person racist or sexist necessarily. More along the lines of that, I feel they're of the impression that sometimes there is a mutually exclusionary relationship between advocating for one of the other. I have met many people, and some even public figures, who have made the argument that that advocating for race issues should be avoided in leftist circles because it ostracizes a large portion of the white electorate who might otherwise be swayed. I have argued with people like that. I have seen people like that. And while it is impossible for me to know whether this is them just being racist and finding a socially permissive way of not wanting to deal with those issues, or whether it is some genuine misconception on their part, it is impossible for me to say. But I think the characteristics are present in, at least to some extent or another, in a great many people. I wouldn't say, if I say somebody has class reductionist tendencies, that this is like some severe moral condemnation. Only that I think there are some ways in which they could reassess their approach towards intersectionality as a concept. But if you, I mean, again, it was an offhand. If you want, I mean, I can find a bunch of receipts and I could go over it. But I felt like, given the priorities right now, with us pretty much on the cusp of being black bagged, I shouldn't lean too heavily into the ostracization of other left-leaning pundits online at this particular point in time. Maybe during a more boring month. And if I do that, would you be interested in talking about it again?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's, again, I consider it, I consider it a serious accusation. I don't think any of those people, with the possible exception of Jimmy Dore, who I've never watched because he seems kind of dumb.
Never speak well of Jimmy Dore, not accidentally, not implicitly.
I don't think any of the rest of those people see class analysis or economic demands certainly as exclusive from thinking that racial and other kinds of biases persist and cause harm, or that we need to, or that it's important, to the extent that it doesn't already exist, to have substantive civic and legal equality for people across these categories. Although on a lot of stuff like disparities in police violence, I think the most important thing we can do to do something about that is to combat poverty for the reasons that I argued earlier. but I am also there's something I'm actually supposed to something else I said I would do.
Of course, yes. For you,
4 minutes ago. So
you and I both
so
have a wonderful day. Thank you. And just to clarify, what I just described, these two things are mutually exclusive. If we're to take the far extreme, you would agree that could be fairly described as class reductionism, yes?
Yeah, if class reductionism means thinking they're mutually exclusive, so thinking that we shouldn't care about racial bias, we shouldn't care about whether anti-discrimination laws cover trans people, then if that's what class reductionism means, then I think class reductionism is very bad. But I'm not convinced that there's any substantive portion of the left that subscribes to that view.
All right. Thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the time. And I wish you luck with whatever was 5 minutes ago.
Okay. Thank you.
Be well.
You too.